Each day, she gave a little more. A glance held longer, a nod instead of silence, a humming sound in the car. When we passed the mural near the park, she didn't speak, but she had begun to sing. Wordless, tuneless, soft, but real. The first time she reached for my hand, we were walking home from the market. August led the way, leash clipped loosely to his collar but never needed. He always walked a pace ahead, pausing every few steps as if making sure we hadn't vanished. She slipped her hand into mine. Without warning. Hold it there for 2 full blocks. And when we reached the porch steps, she let go, not because she was finished, but because she'd made her point. A week later, she gave me something else. Not a word, not a sentence, just a sound. It happened while I was folding laundry. She was in the doorway. August by her side. She held up a crumpled drawing of a sun, a dog, a figure holding a balloon, and pointed to the third shape. Then to me. Then whispered, almost too soft to catch, "Home." That was it. One word, but it landed like a cathedral bell, ringing through the quiet I'd been carrying since the first day she walked into my life and didn't say a thing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from worry, but from wonder. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. August's distant footsteps echoing in the hall. I knew he was doing his rounds. He always did. Checking windows, stopping at doors, returning to her side. Like a sentry who never asked for rest. At dawn, I found them in the living room. She was asleep. On the rug, curled into the shape of a question mark. August wrapped around her like a promise. The light was soft, and for a moment, everything in the world felt like it had been holding its breath just to witness this. I didn't take a photo. I didn't speak. I just stood there and let it be. Grief doesn't leave. It doesn't evaporate or dissolve. It settles, becomes quieter. Learn to sit in the back row instead of screaming from the front. Mine still lived with me, but it no longer controlled the room. Because now, when I looked at Ellie, I didn't see the space I'd lost. I saw the life she was building, the child she was becoming. Not because I saved her, but because August never gave up on her long enough for her to give up on herself. One morning, I found her in the backyard. The sun had only just broken through. She was barefoot in the grass. Her pajama sleeves rolled past her elbows, holding the bear, the original one, still patched and worn. She held it gently, whispering into its ear like it was still listening, and maybe it was. August sat beside her. Not touching her, but close enough that if she fell, he'd catch her. And when she finished, she stood. Turned. And walked to me. She handed me the bear, hold it out between both hands, like a question, or maybe letting go. "I think," she said in her second spoken sentence since arriving, "I think he doesn't need to hold it anymore." I didn't ask why. I didn't press. I just nodded and took it. Held it with the same reverence August once had, then followed her back inside. The bear now sits on a shelf above her bed. Not hidden. Not forgotten, but resting. Retired. August still checks the windows. Still walks beside us like he's reading the world for signs we can't yet see. But something in him is lighter. Now his eyes are softer. His steps are slower. The tension that once lived in his shoulders has been replaced with stillness. Not vigilance, but peace. He knows she's safe now, and he knows I will keep her that way. On the final night before the review hearing, I found her sitting cross-legged on the porch. August was pressed against her side. She was drawing again, crooked lines, short strokes. I didn't ask what it was, but when she handed it to me, I saw what she'd done. A house, a sun, a tree, and 3 figures. This time, one of them had a leash in hand, but not attached to August. Just held. Gently. As if asking, not commanding. And beside the drawing, she'd written her name. Not perfect, letters leaning. But they're Ellie. No last name. No date. Just the name she had chosen to keep. That night, she crawled into her bed on her own. August followed, as always, But this time she rolled toward him, wrapped her arms around his neck, closed her eyes, and fell asleep before he even settled. I stood in the doorway, watching Dot, and for the first time since that day at the bus stop I let go of the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. No one saved anyone. Not really. We just stayed, and in the staying we found each other. The girl, the dog, and the one who chose to stop walking, and when she slept he stayed. But the streetlight above had flickered on, and in the yellow spill of its glow, I saw something I hadn't before. A line of small prints. Not paw prints. Shoes. Tiny ones, like a child had walked there recently. The rain had softened them, but they remained, pressed into the edge of the grass, leading toward the shelter on the other side. He walked toward them, stopped just short, sniffed the air. And then looked at me. There are questions that don't need to be asked out loud. I crouched beside the first print, brushed my fingers through the dirt. Still damp. Recently someone had been there. A child. Close. And suddenly everything felt closer than I'd let myself believe. The bear, the blanket, the sock, they weren't just grief tokens. They were trail markers. I sat with him that night longer than usual. Hours passed. He stayed alert, watching. Waiting. And for the first time since I'd met him, I didn't feel like he was waiting for someone else anymore. He was waiting with me. Later, as I stood to leave, he followed. Not all the way, just a few steps, then paused. I turned. He sat, lifted his paw, and pressed it once lightly against the concrete, leaving a wet mark behind. One single paw print. Then he looked back at the bench, and I understood. It wasn't time yet, but it was coming. Paw print was gone by morning. Wiped away by the night's drizzle, softened by passing feet and wind. But I remembered where it had been, just at the edge of the sidewalk, right where he'd pressed it. He was already there when I arrived, sitting, as always, facing the bench. But something in his posture was different. Not tense, not restless, just aware, like something was coming, or had already passed, and he was waiting for me to notice. I brought the usual, a blanket, a tin of food, a bottle of water, and a quiet promise that I didn't speak aloud. He accepted the food without hesitation now, his mouth careful around my hand. He was gentle in everything he did. As I sat beside him, I noticed the bear was cleaner. Not new, not untouched, just brushed, like he'd taken care to move the debris, keep it dry. The sock was still draped across its back, the blanket folded beside it. The pacifier rested where the sidewalk met the metal leg of the bench. The items didn't feel like lost things anymore. They felt arranged, placed with intention. I wondered, again, about the child, whose things they had been, whether they were offerings the shepherd had gathered or remnants he couldn't bear to leave behind. But that morning, I didn't ask anything. I just sat with him and waited. Around midday, the wind shifted. It came from the west, carrying something new, not quite a scent, but a change in temperature. Like the world had exhaled in a different direction. He lifted his head instantly, ears forward, body leaning, not standing. Not yet. His nose worked the air like memory was a smell, and he was tracing it. Then quietly he rose. Turned. And began to walk. Not fast. Not urgent. Just steady. As if he knew the direction wasn't random. I followed without question. There were no signs, no trail, just his instinct, or maybe something deeper, something older. We crossed the street, past the shelter, and onto a narrow residential path I hadn't walked in years. Houses stood like watchers, most of them dark or half empty. Fences leaned. Yards overgrew. There was a loneliness here that matched the shepherd's gait. He paused near a broken mailbox and sniffed at the ground. Then turned down a side alley so narrow I had to walk sideways to follow. And there near the far end, half concealed by a curtain of ivy, was a gate. It hung crooked on its hinge, locked from the inside. The shepherd sat down in front of it, not pawing, not pressing. Just watching. I stepped beside him. The house beyond the gate was small, weather-beaten, windows dark. One plastic tricycle sat overturned near the porch, faded pink, and beside the stoop a single shoe. Child sized. Purple, torn at the coconut. Heel. The match to the one beneath the bench. I don't know how long we stood there. 5 minutes. Maybe more. I didn't call out. Didn't knock. It wasn't time. Instead, I crouched beside the dog and whispered, more to myself than him. She was here, wasn't she? He didn't move, but his ears shifted slightly toward the door. A sound. Then small, faint, like something shifting behind a curtain. I held my breath, but it didn't come again. That evening, I went home with the image of the tricycle burned into me. It wasn't just a toy left behind, it was a memory waiting to be answered. I thought about calling someone, a social worker, a shelter volunteer, even the police. But IDN single quotes not yet, because something in me understood what he already knew. This wasn't about intervention. It was about timing. About trust earned, not forced. And so I waited. The next morning, I returned to the intersection. The shepherd wasn't there. Not at first. I checked the alley, the gate, the bench. The bear was still in place, but everything else had shifted. The sock was gone. So was the shoe. My chest tightened. Not in panic, but in that quiet grief that comes when you realize something is happening just out of sight. And you can't control it. I sat. Waited. And after nearly an hour, he returned. He came from the west again, not hurried, but with purpose. He didn't look at me. When he sat down, just settled beside the bench, and pressed his nose into the bear's side. I didn't speak, but I noticed a new item, held gently in his mouth, a corner of cloth, small, pale pink, tattered ribbon along the edge, a baby blanket. He placed it beside the bear, carefully. Then rested his head on top of both. Eyes closed, and for a long while we didn't move. A little before dusk, a car passed slowly. Not unusual, the street had grown curious in recent days. A few neighbors began to ask quiet questions, some watching from windows. But this car stopped just past the light. Parked. A figure emerged. Small. Walking. Wobbling. Not running. Just moving forward like I was pulled. The shepherd lifted his head, didn't rise, didn't bark. Just watched. And I turned. The child couldn't have been more than 2, wrapped in an oversized coat, cheeks flushed with cold, hair a tangle of curls that clung to her forehead. No shoes, just socks damp and too thin for the weather. She wasn't crying, wasn't afraid. She just walked. Right toward us. I stood instinctively, ready to help, to ask, to shield, but I didn't move forward, because she passed by me like I wasn't even there, and went straight to the dog. He stood then. Not fast. But full. And for the first time, I saw what he'd been holding back. His whole body softened, melted into something weightless. And the child reached forward. Both hands. No words. Just touch. Fingers pressed against the fur at his chest. The bear between them, the blanket at her feet. And then she sat. Right there on the sidewalk, leaning into him like she'd always known him. I looked up, scanning the street. The car was gone. No driver. No parents. No rush of feet calling her name. Just silence. And the child, resting against the dog like the only safe place in the world, had finally found her again. I didn't speak, didn't move, and neither did he, because in that moment, we both knew this wasn't the beginning. It was the return. She didn't speak, not a sound, not even when the cold air tightened around us, or when her small hands trembled against the shepherd's chest. She just pressed into him, head down, the crown of her curls resting beneath his chin like it had been there before. He didn't move, didn't licker, didn't whine, but something in him changed, not suddenly, but completely. Like an anchor dropped inside his chest. A purpose remembered. His body formed around her without needing to adjust, his front paw curling just slightly to shield her side. His back sloped gently like a cradle. His head lowered over hers, and the space between them disappeared. I stayed kneeling a few feet away, barely breathing. It felt like I'd witnessed a page being turned in his story, only they understood. No questions. No explanations, just a reunion. The sidewalk was wet. Too cold for a child to be sitting barefoot in a coat 3 sizes too large. But she didn't shiver. Not with him there. I looked down at her feet, thin socks, dirty, one torn at the toe. Number. Shoes. Legs bare beneath the coat, knees marked with small smudges of mud. Whatever road she'd taken to get here. It hadn't been paved with care, but still, she'd made it, and she'd made it to him. I pulled the extra blanket from my bag, the soft gray one I'd used to line the bench before. She looked up just briefly as I approached, her eyes wide but calm. No fear, just deep quiet. Like someone who hadn't heard a voice in a long time and wasn't sure if it would still sound the same. I crouched and wrapped the blanket around her legs, tucking it gently beneath her. The shepherd didn't move, but his eyes tracked every motion. Not distrustfully, just watchful, like he was telling me, careful. She's everything. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. The street grew quieter. The light stretched thin, and the clouds gathered again in the corners of the sky. A few people passed. Most didn't stop. One woman slowed, asked softly, "Is she yours?" I opened my mouth, closed it. Then I shook my head. "She's his," I said finally. The woman stared a moment longer, then gave a small nod as if that somehow explained everything. And maybe it did. Eventually, I pulled out the food, a second roll, a sealed bottle of juice, a few crackers tucked into a napkin. The shepherd watched as I unwrapped them. And the girl looked at him. Waited. And only after he blinked slowly and deliberately did she reach out and take one cracker between her fingers. She didn't eat like a child her age should be, fast, distracted, messy. She ate like someone who'd learned to be careful with what little she had. One small bite at a time. No crumbs wasted. No sound made. I asked her name. Quietly. More as a whisper to the wind than a question with weight. But she didn't answer, didn't even blink, and I realized she might not remember it, or she might not trust me with it yet. So I didn't ask again. Names would come later, if they needed to. The shepherd shifted, sometime around dusk. Just enough to nudge her closer to me. And then he stood. Stretched. Turned in a circle, and lay down again, this time behind her. A wall of warmth, of protection. She leaned back against his side like she'd done it 100 times before. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she closed her eyes. She fell asleep like that. On the sidewalk. In the cold. But not alone, not unsafe. I sat beside them until the streetlights buzzed overhead. My coat pulled tight, my hands tucked in my sleeves. I could have called someone then, the shelter, the hospital, someone with paperwork and procedures, but I didn't, because everything about this, the silence, the slowness, the way her small body fit perfectly into the crook of the dog's frame, told me that rushing would break it. This was a glass moment, and I wasn't ready to shatter it with the weight of the world. Instead, I waited until the child stirred. She opened her eyes, slowly, looked around. Found the shepherd. First. Then me. She didn't speak, but she didn't flinch either. I held out my hand, and she placed hers into it, soft, cold, small. Then stood. We walked back together. Far, just across the street, to the small enclosed park behind the shelter. The gate squeaked. The ground was still damp from earlier rain. I laid the blanket down in the dry corner beneath the wooden gazebo. She lay down without prompting. The shepherd curled beside her, and I sat on the bench nearby, watching as her breaths began to deepen again. That night, I didn't go home. I sat there in the park until my body ached. Until the stars came out behind the clouds. Until the streetlights dimmed and the world quieted. And then I closed my eyes. Not to sleep, but to feel what it was like to stay. In the morning, she was still there. So was he. They hadn't moved. When I approached, the shepherd opened one eye. Didn't lift his head. Just watched. I knelt beside them, careful not to disturb the blanket. The girl blinked awake. No fear. No alarm. Just presence. I offered her the juice again. She took it. Drank. Then slowly held it out to the shepherd, and though he didn't drink, he sniffed it. She smiled. Tiny. Barely there, but real. And in that moment, I realized she knew him, not from last night. From before. The way she leaned into him, the way he shifted to shield her from the wind, the way their silences fit together like puzzle pieces. This wasn't new. It was returned. Later that day, a volunteer from the shelter came by. She spotted us through the fence and stopped short. Met her at the gate. She looked from the girl to the dog and back again. Did they come in together? She asked softly. No, I said, but they found each other. She didn't press. Just nodded and said, let me know when you're ready. Then she left, and we stayed. Because sometimes rescue isn't about pulling someone out. It's about sitting beside them until they remember they can stand again. And on that cold, quiet morning, beneath a wooden roof and a sky that still hadn't decided whether to rain, again a child rested against a dog who had never once looked away from her. And that was enough. The third morning, she woke before I did. I opened my eyes to find her already sitting up, one hand buried deep in the shepherd's ruff, the other resting on his side like she was keeping count of his breaths. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. There was something about her posture, the way her spine held straight, even under the weight of an oversized coat and sleep-tangled hair that felt older than it should have. Like she'd been carrying something heavier than her own name. Still, she didn't speak, but she looked at me now, not past me. Not through me. At me. And that was new. The shepherd had shifted again during the night. He lay with his body angled, just enough to block the morning wind, legs extended toward her as if measuring the space she might need. I had no doubt he hadn't slept fully. His eyes were too alert. His body is still. He was doing what he'd always done. Watching. Waiting. Guarding. But now he had something to protect again, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could see his purpose stretch out in every motion. Not just a habit. Not survival. Devotion. I brought breakfast, small things she could hold. Halved grapes, a soft roll, a cup of applesauce I'd tucked in my bag the night before. She touched everything with care, studied each piece like it might disappear. I didn't push her to eat, didn't coax or bribe or smile too much. She'd eat when she was ready, and she did. After feeding the shepherd first 2 pieces of bread, torn into small strips, placed carefully between his paws, he didn't move until she finished. And then he ate each one with quiet patience, as though her offering meant more than the food itself. By mid-morning, the child was standing on her own, wobbly at first. Her socks are still damp, one slipping down past her heel. I made a note to find shoes. Something small and warm, but she didn't complain. She never did. She just moved slowly, deliberately, with her hand wrapped loosely in the thick fur of the shepherd's neck. Where he went, she followed. We stayed near the park at first. There was a narrow path that looped around the benches and led to a rusted play structure that had long since lost its color. The slide leaned slightly. The swing hung crooked. She didn't seem interested in climbing or running. She just walked, one slow circle after another, the shepherd at her side. He didn't leash, didn't stray. He paced her and matched her speed. Exactly, his shoulder brushing hers every few steps like a metronome ticking just beneath the surface of their shared silence. The quiet between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of memory. Of knowing, of something that no one else could translate. That afternoon, a city worker passed through the far end of the park. He paused, watching them from a distance. When I met his eyes, he gestured softly toward the girl. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded. "She's safe." He looked at the shepherd, then at me, then back to her. "You sure?" "Yes." I didn't offer more, And he didn't ask again, just nodded once and walked on, but I knew what he'd seen. A child too small to be alone, a dog too alert to be random, and a silence too deep to ignore. Later that evening, I found an old pair of toddler boots in the back of my closet, from a box I hadn't opened in years. Things I couldn't bring myself to donate, but couldn't keep on the shelf either. They were red, scuffed on one toe. I stared at them for a long time before wiping them down and placing them in my bag. When I offered them to her the next day, she didn't reach for them. She looked at the shepherd first. And he, in turn, stepped forward, sniffed the boots. Then I looked back at her. And only then did she take them from my hands. She didn't smile, but she slipped them on, one at a time. As if she remembered the kiko motion. As if it had once been routine. And when she stood in them, even slightly too big, even stiff from time, she walked straighter. That day, we wandered farther. Not much, just to the edge of the sidewalk, where the pavement met the grass outside the park. The shepherd walked ahead now, just one pace. But every few steps he'd glance back. She never called him, never needed to. Her eyes followed his movement like a compass to true north. And when he paused, she paused. When he turned, she followed. And I always followed them both. It was around the third loop when someone new appeared. A woman, maybe late 40s, windbreaker, running shoes, dog leash hanging loose in one hand. She slowed when she saw us, stopped entirely when her eyes landed on the girl. "Oh," she whispered, not to anyone in particular. I stood straighter. The shepherd positioned himself between the girl and the stranger. Not aggressive, just present. Like a gate that had quietly closed. The woman didn't approach. She just watched them, dog and girl, and blinked, like she'd stepped into a story without knowing the plot. "Is she yours?" she asked me, nodding toward the child. I paused. Then I shook my head. "No," I said, "but he is." And I nodded toward the shepherd, her brow furrowed slightly. But she didn't push. She watched them a moment longer. Then, "He looks like he's done this before." I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure if she meant guarding or grieving. She walked on after that. Quiet. Respectful. But I could feel it now. People were noticing, not just the oddity of a child and a stray dog, but something else, something deeper. Like watching a ritual take place in the middle of an ordinary street, sacred, unspoken, and not meant to be interrupted. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed with them again, the three of us beneath the quiet sprawl of an overgrown maple tree near the gazebo. She curled into the shepherd's chest again, and he tucked his chin over her shoulder. I watched her hand twitch once in her sleep, fingers curling like she was reaching for something she used to hold. Maybe a hand, maybe a home. I didn't ask, but I whispered something into the darkness anyway. A hope, a vow, something the night could hold for me, just in case no one else could. That night, the shepherd didn't sleep. Neither did I. The girl lay in the middle, curled tight, her breath light against the crook of his neck. Every few minutes, he would lift his head, check the gate, then lower it again. His body was tense, not in fear. In readiness. He knew, maybe not the details, but the weight of it. The shift in air, the stillness in my breath, the way the world had narrowed around the space he kept safe. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't do anything. I had one friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, a woman who worked quietly in a corner of the city's legal aid office. I sent her a message, just a name and a question. Is there a way to keep them together? I didn't expect a reply that night, but she answered in less than an hour. Maybe, but it's not easy. I told her everything, not in detail, not with names I didn't have, but the truth, the child, the shepherd. The silence, the bond, the rain. She sent me a list in return. A set of steps, paperwork, a recommendation letter, an emergency foster petition, not for the girl alone, but for the pair. Filed under extenuating circumstances. She told me it had almost never been done. Almost. But it almost wasn't 0. And 0 was what the world would give them if I waited. I spent the next day gathering what I could. Writing everything down, pulling receipts from donations, photographs I'd taken of the girl feeding the dog, the bear resting between them, and the walks in the rain. Evidence of a life forming, of a bond worth protecting. I printed them out. Each one is like a heartbeat, and somewhere in that mess, I found a rhythm, not a plan, not certainty, but hope. The girl didn't understand what I was doing, but she watched. Her eyes followed every motion. Her hands pressed flat against the table where I sorted the photos. At one point, she picked up the one where the shepherd lay curled beside her in the sun. She touched the edge with her thumb, and then she did something she hadn't done since. The day she arrived, she handed it to me. Hold it up. As if to say, this is what you need to show them. That night, I told the shepherd, just the two of us. Her breath was already steady, her body tucked deep into his chest. I leaned close, pressed my hand into his fur, and whispered, "I'm trying." His ear flicked once, and then he lowered his head onto the girl's hip. As if to say, "I know." The morning of the deadline came with silver light and heavy clouds. I wore my cleanest coat, carried the envelope beneath my arm. The girl walked beside the shepherd, hand buried deep in his fur. I didn't have to ask her to come. She just stood when he did. Like always, we reached the office by 9 a.m. The woman from Child Services met us in the lobby. She looked surprised to see all three of us, but she didn't speak. Just led us to a small room with quiet walls and 2 chairs. The girl sat on the floor. The shepherd curled around her, and I handed over the envelope. She opened it slowly. Page by page, silence stretching between us like fabric drying in the wind. She read it all, then looked at me. And then, for the first time, I looked at them. She didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped, and she said only one thing: "I'll see what I can do." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. And in this world, sometimes the difference between silence and rejection is hope. It took them 2 days. 2 days, where no one said anything final, no decisions handed down, no calls returned. Just silence. Thick, uncertain, waiting. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, only counts. The girl didn't notice the pause in time the way I did. She kept to her rhythm with slow morning walks beside the shepherd, short breaks on the bench near the fence, quiet naps beneath the tree whose branches still held the last gold leaves of fall. I felt it every hour, every minute I hadn't heard back, every moment where the future hangs by a single thread of hope, stretched thin across the form, is submitted. The woman from Child Services came again on the 3rd morning. This time, she knocked on the park gate before entering, not out of formality but respect. The shepherd watched her approach. He didn't rise, didn't move, but he tracked her steps with his eyes, the same way he always did. The girl was brushing her fingers through his fur. She didn't stop when the Fava woman arrived, didn't look up. Not yet. The woman crouched at a distance, and then she spoke. "I read everything," she said. "All of it." Her voice was soft, tired maybe, but not closed. "And?" She glanced at me. Then at them, then back at the folder she'd brought. "I don't have full authority to decide," she said, "but I spoke with someone who does." The pause after that was longer than I could stand, and her eyes didn't lift from the folder. "They've agreed to a conditional arrangement. Emergency kinship foster." I blinked. "Kinship? You," she said. "Temporary guardianship, if you're willing. Under review every 30 days. I stared at her. I hadn't asked for that. I hadn't asked for me to be part of the solution. Just them, just together. But of course nothing works like that. The system needs names. I need homes, paper, accountability. Someone has to stand in the gap. And apparently that someone was me. Nodded. Not because I was ready, but because they were. And that was enough. "We still need her name," the woman added gently. Something. For the record. I turned to the girl. She was still sitting quietly, still touching the shepherd's side. Crouched beside her, her eyes flicked toward mine, not frightened, just guarded. And then without prompting, she did something she hadn't done before. She leaned forward, put her mouth beside the dog's ear, and whispered something into the space between them. The dog didn't react, not outwardly, but I saw his breath change, just slightly, and she turned to me. Her lips didn't move again, but her hand reached out, not to the bear, not to the blanket, but to the picture I still kept in my bag. The one of the three of us. She tapped it once with her finger, then placed her hand over her heart. And held it there. The woman watched in silence. I turned back to her. She hasn't said it out loud. I told her, but I think it's Ellie. It could have been Eliza, Eleanor, Elise, but Ellie felt right. Soft, simple, familiar. Like something that had once been sung in lullabies. The woman nodded, wrote it down. Then asked the other question. And the dog? I looked at him. He was sitting now directly between us and Ellie, his gaze steady on my face. I hadn't named him either. Not out loud. But in my mind over and over again, in those long nights and slow mornings I had whispered something when the world wasn't listening. August. Because he reminded me of that last month before everything changed, before the nursery grew quiet, before the tiny shoes were boxed up and the air stopped smelling like milk and sunlight. Before grief became my only companion. August. The month of endings that never quite feel final. I spoke about it now. Quiet, sure. August, I said. The woman nodded, wrote it down beside Ellie's name. Ellie and August, she said aloud. Together, yes. She stood slowly, closed the folder, and didn't smile. But there was something softer in her eyes now, something like relief. We'll send follow-up paperwork, she said. A social worker will visit weekly. I nodded. Thank you. She paused before leaving, then added, almost as an afterthought, it's rare, what you're doing. It wasn't a decision, I said. It was already happening. The next few days blurred. Forms, phone calls. A visit from a case manager who stayed 10 minutes, said nothing, and left with red eyes. For the delivery of groceries, I didn't order milk, fruit, or small clothes folded into paper bags. Someone out there had heard, and they were answering in the only way they could. Ellie began to change. Not quickly. Not fully, but slowly. In pieces. She still didn't speak, but she began to hum low, tuneless melodies when August was sleeping. Sounds without words, but not without feeling. She let me brush her hair. She let me hold her hand crossing the street. She drew a picture with sidewalk chalk one morning of a sun, a tree, and a dog. She added a small stick figure child beside him, and then she added a third shape taller, standing just to the left. She didn't label it, but she handed it to me when it was done. And pressed it into my palm like something too important to leave behind. That night, as the wind picked up and the last leaves finally let go of the trees, we sat together beneath the maple. August lay between us, Ellie's feet tucked into the crook of his belly, my arm resting on the bench behind her back. No words, just breathe, just presence. And in the silence, I said what none of us had yet spoken. You're safe now. She looked at me. Then leaned her head against my side, and for the first time, she closed her eyes before he did. The air smelled different that morning. Not cleaner, not sharper. Just settled, like the wind had finally stopped trying to move something that had already found its place. I watched Ellie eat a quartered piece of toast from her lap, her tiny boots dangling off the edge of the park bench. August lay stretched at her feet, one eye half closed, the other tracking the birds that skittered through the grass nearby. We've been here nearly 3 weeks. Now 3 weeks since she'd first appeared barefoot on the sidewalk. 3 weeks since August had given me a chance to sit close enough to remember how grief turns into guardianship. They found the dog beneath the overhang of an abandoned bus stop, his coat soaked through, a torn teddy bear cradled beneath one paw. The rain hadn't let up in hours. Neither had he. This story is about loyalty that never forgot. About a bond that wasn't spoken, only felt. It will break you, and then it might stay with you longer than you'd expect. Like, share, and tell us where in the world you are watching from today. It was the kind of rain that silences even the cars. Thick and steady, not violent, just persistent. The kind that feels like it's always been falling. He lay there, not moving, not blinking. Just his shape in the gray fur, matted, breath shallow, eyes dull. The bear beneath him had once been white. Now it was the color of the mud pooling in the gutter beside them. No collar, no leash, no name. He didn't bark. He didn't flinch when the delivery truck slowed beside the stoplight. He didn't move when the driver opened the window and stared. People had passed him. Some took photos. A few left food. One tried to call him, softly, then louder. But the German shepherd never rose. He just stayed beside that toy, and the bear, half missing one eye, stitched down the middle like it had once been torn in two, was tucked beneath his chest like something precious. There was no one else. Just the rain. And the way he would sometimes shift, barely, as if listening for something only he remembered. I didn't see him the first time I passed. My mind was elsewhere, just static and schedules and the things I didn't want to feel. But on the second day, I noticed the blur of fur through the passenger side window. I slowed. My windshield wipers swept once, then twice, and then I saw it. Not just the dog, but the bear, and the way he held it. He wasn't guarding it. He was mourning with it. I don't know what made me park. I hadn't planned to. I didn't even have an umbrella, but I stepped out anyway. Boots sinking into the edge of the puddle. He didn't growl. Didn't move. Just watched. Eyes like dark glass. The kind of eyes that have seen too much and are still waiting for someone who never came back. I crouched. There was a quietness to the air now. The kind you only notice after grief has carved a space inside you. And I realized it wasn't the rain that soaked him. It was time. Time, and waiting, and something he wouldn't let go of. I whispered something, I think. His ears twitched barely. But he didn't rise. There was a scar along his hind leg. Long, pale, old. And his ribs were too visible beneath that thick coat. But it was the bear that held me still. I recognized it. Not the brand. Not the pattern. The shape. It was the kind of bear they give in hospitals. Small hands, soft body, easy to hold through hard things. I've seen one like it. A long time ago. I stayed longer than I should have. The kind of long where your legs go numb, and you realize the cold is under your skin. He didn't follow when I left, but as I pulled away, I saw him, his head lifted slightly, not to beg, not to chase, just to watch, the way you watch a door close or a memory fade. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I don't know if it was the rain tapping at the window or the dream I couldn't quite hold on to, but when I opened my eyes, his image was still there. The dog, the bear, the silence between them. I poured coffee I didn't drink. Sat at the edge of the table with my coat still on. Something in me was unsettled, not alarmed, not afraid. Just aware, in that bone-deep way you feel when something outside your life quietly demands to be let in. I wasn't looking to get involved. I'd told myself that enough times that year to make it sound like a prayer, but memory doesn't always need permission. Sometimes it just leaks through quietly. In moments. In fur soaked through and a child's toy left behind. By the time I reached the intersection, the rain had stopped. The street still shimmered with its passing wet pavement catching light like a film. Real left out in the sun. He was still there. Same position, same stillness, but the bear was gone. I pulled over too fast. Left the engine running. The bus stop looked even more hollow without it. He didn't lift his head this time. Just stared forward, like his eyes were fixed on something I couldn't see. I stepped out, slower than yesterday. A few scraps of bread lay nearby. Someone had tried to help in their own way, but the food hadn't been touched. Not even nudged. I crouched again, at the same angle. Let the silence settle around us like a blanket someone else had folded. Still no collar. No tag, no markings. Beyond the scar, but his eyes flickered. Barely. Like something had shifted inside. I whispered, just like before. A name I didn't know, maybe. Or just a sound. He didn't respond. But he did blink. Slow. Intentional. And then a shift. He reached forward, carefully, with his front paw. And for the first time, I saw it. The teddy bear. He'd hidden it beneath the bench. Tucked away like something stolen or sacred. I don't know why, but it made my chest tighten. I looked away, suddenly unsure if I'd intruded on something too personal. There are moments like that with grief. Moments when you witness someone else's pain and realize you're not meant to fix it. Only to see it. A wind passed through, light but cold. It lifted the edge of a plastic bag nearby. He flinched slightly, not from fear, but memory. I saw it ripple through his body, that brief tightening. Like a muscle remembering something it had once had to survive. He stood then, for the first time, unsteady, but strong. Tall, too, not just in size, but in presence. The kind of dog that was built to stand beside someone. To guard. To be counted on. He didn't bark, didn't growl. But he took one step forward, then another, until he was close enough that I could see the threads of old scars beneath his fur. And then he stopped. The teddy bear is still hidden beneath the bench. As if he wouldn't leave it. Not again. I backed away slowly. Opened my car door and waited. He didn't move. He just sat back down, beside the bench, and lowered his head against the pavement. Watching. Waiting. Stayed in my car for almost an hour. Just watching him from across the street. At one point, a man with a cigarette paused nearby. He looked at the dog, then at me, and shook his head slightly, muttering something I couldn't hear. He walked on. A woman passed with a stroller. She didn't stop. A pair of kids ran by with wet backpacks and loud laughter. The shepherd didn't react. It was like he existed at a different tempo than the rest of us. A slower rhythm, a pause inside. The noise. I drove to the shelter that afternoon. Not because I was ready to bring him in, but because I needed to know something. The woman behind the desk barely looked up at first. Her eyes were tired. The kind of tiredness that comes from too many drop-offs and not enough answers. German shepherd, I said. Older, no collar, been at the bus stop for 2 days. Her fingers stopped moving over the keyboard. She looked up. With the teddy bear? I nodded. She exhaled, quietly. He's been reported twice this week, but nobody's claimed him. Number. Ship. No known owner. Animal control's planning a pickup by Friday, if no one steps in. Friday. 2 days. And the bear? I asked. She tilted her head. What about it? Did someone say where it came from? No. She paused, then added, sometimes they carry things, blankets, shoes, toys. Depends on the dog. Some let go, some don't. I didn't say anything, but I thought of the way he'd tucked the bear beneath the bench like it was a secret only he was allowed to keep. I left my number. Told them I'd check back in. I didn't promise anything, but part of me already knew I would return. That night, the rain didn't fall, but the cold deepened. And somewhere in the back of my thoughts, I kept seeing him, the slow way he blinked, the careful step forward, the unbearable patience of it all. I dreamed, finally. Not of him, but a child's hand as tiny, reaching, letting go of something soft. A bear, and a door closing. The next morning I came back with food. I set it down gently, a few feet from where he still sat, unmoved. He didn't touch it right away. But he looked at me longer this time, not suspicion. Not trust either, just familiarity. I sat down nearby, not too close, not too far, and I waited. Eventually, he rose, walked toward the food, ate slowly, and then, without a sound, he picked up the bear in his mouth, walked to the edge of the bench, and laid it gently at my feet. I didn't reach for it, didn't speak, but I knew. Somehow he wasn't offering it, he was letting me see it, letting me be part of the memory it held, a quiet trust, a moment shared. And then he lay down again. Not beside the bench this time, but closer, almost near enough to touch. I didn't touch the bear. It stayed there between us, damp and frayed, like a relic pulled from the heart of something half-remembered. He'd placed it with the kind of care that doesn't come from instinct, it came from memory, from ritual. The bear was his tether, not just to a child but to a moment he hadn't left. I sat still, letting the silence stretch. The morning air hadn't warmed yet, and the smell of wet concrete hung close. A pigeon flapper nearby. He didn't move. His ears turned slightly, but his eyes stayed on the toy. And then slowly, they shifted to me. There was no demand for them, no question, just wait. Like he was seeing whether I'd stay with the story, or leave like the others had. I stayed. But the streetlight above had flickered on, and in the yellow spill of its glow, I saw something I hadn't before. A line of small prints, not paw prints. Shoes. Tiny ones, like a child had walked there recently. The rain had softened them, but they remained, pressed into the edge of the grass, leading toward the shelter on the other side. He walked toward them, stopped just short, sniffed the air. And then looked at me. There are questions that don't need to be asked out loud. I crouched beside the first print, brushed my fingers through the dirt, still damp. Recently someone had been there, a child. Close. And suddenly everything felt closer than I'd let myself believe. The bear, the blanket, the sock, they weren't just grief tokens. They were trail markers. I sat with him that night longer than usual. Hours passed. He stayed alert, watching. Waiting. And for the first time since I'd met him, I didn't feel like he was waiting for someone else anymore. He was waiting with me. Later, as I stood to leave, he followed, not all the way, just a few steps, then paused. I turned. He sat, lifted his paw, and pressed it once lightly against the concrete, leaving a wet mark behind, one single paw print. Then he looked back at the bench, and I understood. It wasn't time yet, but it was coming. Paw print was gone by morning. Wiped away by the night's drizzle, softened by passing feet and wind. But I remembered where it had been, just at the edge of the sidewalk, right where he'd pressed it. He was already there when I arrived, sitting, as always, facing the bench. But something in his posture was different, not tense, not restless, just aware, like something was coming, or had already passed, and he was waiting for me to notice. I brought the usual, a blanket, a tin of food, a bottle of water, and a quiet promise that I didn't speak aloud. He accepted the food without hesitation now, his mouth careful around my hand. He was gentle in everything he did. As I sat beside him, I noticed the bear was cleaner, not new, not untouched, just brushed, like he'd taken care to move the debris, keep it dry. The sock was still draped across its back, the blanket folded beside it. The pacifier rested where the sidewalk met the metal leg of the bench. The items didn't feel like lost things anymore. They felt arranged, placed with intention. I wondered, again, about the child, whose things they had been, whether they were offerings the shepherd had gathered or remnants he couldn't bear to leave behind. But that morning, I didn't ask anything. I just sat with him and waited. Around midday, the wind shifted. It came from the west, carrying something new, not quite a scent, but a change in temperature. Like the world had exhaled in a different direction. He lifted his head instantly, ears forward, body leaning, not standing. Not yet. His nose worked the air like memory was a smell, and he was tracing it. Then quietly he rose. Turned. And began To walk not fast, not urgent, just steady, as if he knew the direction. Wasn't random. I followed without question. There were no signs. No trail. Just his instinct, or maybe something deeper. Something older. We crossed the street, past the shelter, and onto a narrow residential path I hadn't walked in years. Houses stood like watchers, most of them dark or half empty. Fences leaned. Yards overgrew. There was a loneliness here that matched the shepherd's gait. He paused near a broken mailbox and sniffed at the ground, then turned down a side alley so narrow I had to walk sideways to follow. And there near the far end, half concealed by a curtain of ivy, was a gate. It hung crooked on its hinge, locked from the inside. The shepherd sat down in front of it, not pawing, not pressing, just watching. I stepped beside him. The house beyond the gate was small, weather-beaten, windows dark. One plastic tricycle sat overturned near the porch, faded pink, and beside the stoop a single shoe. Child sized. Purple, torn at the coconut heel. The match to the one beneath the bench. I don't know how long we stood there. 5 minutes. Maybe more. I didn't call out. Didn't knock. It wasn't time. Instead, I crouched beside the dog and whispered, more to myself than him. She was here, wasn't she? He didn't move, but his ears shifted slightly toward the door. A sound. Then small, faint, like something shifting behind a curtain. I held my breath, but it didn't come again. That evening, I went home with the image of the tricycle burned into me. It wasn't just a toy left behind. It was a memory waiting to be answered. I thought about calling someone, a social worker, a shelter volunteer, even the police. But IDN single quotes not yet, because something in me understood what he already knew. This wasn't about intervention. It was about timing. About trust earned, not forced. And so I waited. The next morning, I returned to the intersection. The shepherd wasn't there. Not at first. I checked the alley, the gate, the bench. The bear was still in place, but everything else had shifted. The sock was gone. So was the shoe. My chest tightened. Not in panic, but in that quiet grief that comes when you realize something is happening just out of sight. And you can't control it. I sat. Waited. And after nearly an hour, he returned. He came from the west again, not hurried, but with purpose. He didn't look at me. When he sat down, just settled beside the bench, and pressed his nose into the bear's side. I didn't speak, but I noticed a new item, held gently in his mouth, a corner of cloth, small, pale pink, tattered ribbon along the edge, a baby blanket. He placed it beside the bear, carefully. Then rested his head on top of both. Eyes closed, and for a long while we didn't move. A little before dusk, a car passed slowly. Not unusual. The street had grown curious in recent days. A few neighbors began to ask quiet questions, some watching from windows. But this car stopped just past the light. Parked. A figure emerged. Small. Walking. Wobbling. Not running. Just moving forward like I was pulled. The shepherd lifted his head, didn't rise, didn't bark. Just watched. And I turned. The child couldn't have been more than 2, wrapped in an oversized coat, cheeks flushed with cold, hair a tangle of curls that clung to her forehead. No shoes, just socks damp and too thin for the weather. She wasn't crying, wasn't afraid. She just walked. Right toward us. I stood instinctively, ready to help, to ask, to shield, but I didn't move forward, because she passed by me like I wasn't even there, and went straight to the dog. He stood then. Not fast. But full. And for the first time, I saw what he'd been holding back. His whole body softened, melted into something weightless. And the child reached forward. Both hands. No words. Just touch. Fingers pressed against the fur at his chest. The bear between them, the blanket at her feet. And then she sat. Right there on the sidewalk, leaning into him like she'd always known him. I looked up, scanning the street. The car was gone. No driver. No parents. No rush of feet calling her name. Just silence. And the child, resting against the dog like the only safe place in the world, had finally found her again. I didn't speak, didn't move, and neither did he, because in that moment, we both knew this wasn't the beginning. It was the return. She didn't speak. Not a sound. Not even when the cold air tightened around us, or when her small hands trembled against the shepherd's chest. She just pressed into him, head down, the crown of her curls resting beneath his chin like it had been there before. He didn't move, didn't lick her, didn't whine. But something in him changed, not suddenly, but completely. Like an anchor dropped inside his chest. A purpose remembered. His body formed around her without needing to adjust, his front paw curling just slightly to shield her side. His back sloped gently like a cradle. His head lowered over hers, and the space between them disappeared. I stayed kneeling a few feet away, barely breathing. It felt like I'd witnessed a page being turned in his story, only they understood. No questions. No explanations, just a reunion. The sidewalk was wet. Too cold for a child to be sitting barefoot in a coat 3 sizes too large. But she didn't shiver. Not with him there. I looked down at her feet, thin socks, dirty, one torn at the toe. Number. Shoes. Legs bare beneath the coat, knees marked with small smudges of mud. Whatever road she'd taken to get here, it hadn't been paved with care, but still, she'd made it, and she'd made it to him. I pulled the extra blanket from my bag, the soft gray one I'd used to line the bench before. She looked up just briefly as I approached, her eyes wide but calm. No fear, just deep quiet. Like someone who hadn't heard a voice in a long time and wasn't sure if it would still sound the same. I crouched and wrapped the blanket around her legs, tucking it gently beneath her. The shepherd didn't move, but his eyes tracked every motion. Not distrustfully, just watchful, like he was telling me, careful. She's everything. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. The street grew quieter. The light stretched thin, and the clouds gathered again in the corners of the sky. A few people passed. Most didn't stop. One woman slowed, asked softly, "Is she yours?" I opened my mouth, closed it. Then I shook my head. "She's his," I said finally. The woman stared a moment longer, then gave a small nod as if that somehow explained everything. And maybe it did. Eventually, I pulled out the food, a second roll, a sealed bottle of juice, a few crackers tucked into a napkin. The shepherd watched as I unwrapped them. And the girl looked at him. Waited. And only after he blinked slowly and deliberately did she reach out and take one cracker between her fingers. We didn't speak, of course. That's not how these things go. But in the hours that followed, something passed between us, not in the way people mean when they say they bonded, but in the quieter sense. Like two people waiting in the same hospital hallway who never exchange names, but who remember the other's silence for years. There's a kind of grief that doesn't wail. It just sits, breathes, doesn't ask for anything except time. That was him. And maybe in a way I hadn't let myself acknowledge that was me too. I came back again that evening. And the evening after that. He never strayed. Never chased after any of the cars or wandered into traffic. He didn't even move when teenagers walked past and threw a wrapper near his paws. Just lifted his head, watched, lowered it again. Food I bought was eaten, but only after I left it and moved away. He trusted, but only at a distance. That invisible line, the one built from whatever had come before me, still held. And I respected it. Because sometimes the only way to reach something broken is to wait until it decides you've earned the right to stand beside it. By the fourth day, I noticed something new. Not in him, but in me. A pattern had formed. My mornings started with coffee I barely tasted. My afternoons bent around the visit. My evenings lingered with the weight of his stillness pressed behind my ribs like a breath I hadn't let out. I was remembering things I hadn't meant to. Old things. A photo frame I'd hidden in the back of a drawer, the way small hands once tugged at my shirt. The silence of the nursery after everything was packed away. Grief returns like fog. Slowly, and then all at once. I hadn't wanted to remember, but he didn't seem to give me the choice. That day, I brought a blanket. It wasn't special. Just something from the back of the closet, still folded from the last time I'd moved. But it felt right to offer something of comfort. Something soft. I placed it near the bench, not touching him, not covering the bear, and I waited. He sniffed it eventually, walked in a slow arc around it, then lowered his body down onto the very edge, his front paws still off the fabric, like he wasn't sure he deserved the warmth. He fell asleep like that. Eyes half closed, muscles tense even in rest, and the bear curled close beneath his jaw. That was the first time I saw him dream. It started in his legs, a faint twitch, then a soft growl that barely vibrated the air. His ear flicked, then again. And then the whimper, a sharp, involuntary sound. Quick, then gone. I didn't move. I didn't speak, but at that moment, I saw the shape of something I hadn't seen before. Not just loyalty, but lost. Deep, personal, like he hadn't lost a home but a heartbeat. The next morning, I was late. Just an hour, but the kind that matters when someone's waiting and doesn't know if you'll return. He was sitting up when I arrived, not pacing, not agitated, but watching, expectant. And beside the bear something new, a child's sock. Small, faded yellow, torn at the heel. It hadn't been there the day before. I walked slowly, sat down where I always did, and stared at the sock like it might answer questions I wasn't ready to ask. He nudged it once with his nose, then looked at me. And I knew it wasn't a toy. It wasn't random. It was part of a story he couldn't tell, and he was trusting me to listen. There were more items in the days that followed. A pacifier cracked down the side, bib crusted with something long dried, its cartoon print almost worn away. A small pink sneaker with the laces missing. He never brought them all at once, just one at a time, placed near the bear like petals around a grave. Each time he looked at me the same way, not asking for help. Just offering me the truth, and it hit me harder than I expected. This dog, who had no words, was still showing me everything. And somehow, I was the only one looking. I went back to the shelter. Told them I thought he was collecting items from someone specific. A child? The woman behind the desk asked. I nodded. Or maybe more than that. She didn't press. Just wrote something on a form and asked if I'd named him yet. I hadn't. I still haven't, because naming something means claiming it, and he didn't belong to me. Not yet. He belonged to something else. Some story that hadn't finished unfolding, something he still waited for, even as the world passed by. That night it rained again, harder this time. I drove through it with my hazard lights blinking. My heart is tight. When I pulled up to the intersection, my headlights caught on the shimmer of wet fur. He was there. Soaked, cold. But upright. The bear beside him, and the sock, now pressed close to his paw like a talisman. I stepped out, umbrella forgotten. Crossed the street without thinking. He watched me come, and this time he didn't back away. He let me sit beside him, not across, close enough to hear his breath, close enough to feel the weight of his waiting settle between us. I didn't say anything. Inside, something was shifting, not just for him, for me, because grief has a strange way of recognizing itself in others. And in his silence, I heard an echo of mine. The next morning, the sun tried to rise, but the clouds didn't move. They just hung there low, heavy, like they were still holding something they hadn't finished letting go of. I stopped at the bakery before heading to the intersection. Bought 2 rolls I didn't need and tucked one into my coat pocket. Habit, or maybe guilt. It's hard to explain. When I arrived, he was already there. Not that he ever really left. The teddy bear rested near his paws again, But now the small yellow sock was draped across its back like a blanket, or maybe a memory. The other items were still tucked beneath the bench where he always kept them. Each one is carefully placed, never chewed, never scattered. That was what stayed with me the most. He didn't collect these things. He remembered them. Each item was a bookmark in a story I didn't yet know how to read. He looked up when I stepped from the car, and this time for the first time his tail moved, just once, a small hesitant sweep across the sidewalk, like he wasn't sure if the gesture still mattered. I sat beside him, close now. That invisible line had shifted. Not erased, but softened the way time blurs grief into something you can finally sit beside without falling apart. I held out the roll. He took it, gently. No growl. No rush, just that quiet, deliberate calm that had come to define him. And then, without prompting, he lowered his head to my lap. The bear is still in front of him. The sock is unmoved, but he trusts me now. His weight was solid, warm, and I realized, as my hand rested against the damp fur at his neck, I hadn't touched another living thing in weeks. The day passed slowly. I didn't rush it. Cars came and went. A few paused. One woman smiled at me as she passed, then looked at the dog and said softly, "Still here, huh?" I nodded. She walked on without waiting for a reply, and I wondered, not for the first time, how many people had seen him. How many had looked and still missed him, because there's a kind of seeing that's shallow. A glance, a photo, a moment posted and forgotten. And then there's witnessing. That's what I was learning to do. What he was teaching me. To sit. To listen. To see what stayed. Near midday, he rose suddenly. Ears lifted, nose twitching. I followed his gaze, but there was nothing. Just an empty sidewalk and the breeze picking up through the alley. But something in him had shifted. I could feel it through the tension in his spine, the way his chest moved faster now. He stepped forward, then stopped. Head tilted, I stood, not sure whether to follow. Then I heard it too, a faint sound, high and quick, like a hiccup, or maybe a cough, muffled by distance and wind. He took another step, and this time I went with him. We rounded the corner together. His pace was careful, not fast like he didn't want to startle whatever he sensed. The alley was narrow, tucked between two closed storefronts. The bricks were damp, the air colder there. A dumpster stood near the back wall, lid open. I scanned the ground, nothing. No movement. But he kept walking, and then he stopped, beside a small patch of blanket, half buried beneath a broken crate. It was faded blue, patterned with stars. And unmistakably meant for a child. He sniffed it, then lowered his body down, front legs stretched, nose resting near the fabric. I crouched beside him. The blanket was damp, but intact, soft, recently handled. Someone had been here. Recently. I picked it up gently. And that's when I noticed it. The edge was torn just slightly, and tucked within the frayed seam was a small plastic tag, worn smooth. Letters barely visible, but they were there. Lia, maybe Ellie, or Elijah. I couldn't tell, but he could, because when I whispered the name aloud, his eyes closed. And he exhaled. Not a sigh. A release. Like a breath he'd been holding since the day he was left behind. We walked back to the bus stop together. No leash. Number. Command. Just a shared gravity. The blanket joined the rest beneath the bench, folded gently beside the bear. He didn't look at me for approval. He didn't need to. This wasn't for me. This was a shrine. A vigil. And I was just a visitor. That night, I drove past the intersection twice before I parked. Something in me was restless, pulled when I reached him. He was standing again, staring across the street. At the bench. At the space behind it. I followed his gaze. Nothing. No one. Because where he went, she followed, and where she leaned, he stayed, and somewhere in that quiet space between a bark never made and a name never spoken, they were healing. Together. They were still asleep when the car pulled up, that it wasn't fast. It didn't flash lights or blare sound. It just rolled to a stop along the curb and sat there, a plain sedan. Government plates. The kind people don't usually notice unless they've had reason to. I noticed because I'd been waiting for something like this, not wanting it, just expecting it. The world never lets quiet things stay untouched for long. The shepherd stirred. First, always alert, even in sleep. He didn't stand, not yet, but he lifted his head and turned it slowly toward the sound of the engine. The girl didn't move. She was curled deep in the blanket, her breath even, one small hand clutching the fur near his ribs. A man stepped out of the car, not in uniform, but you didn't need a badge to carry authority. He had it on his shoulders. In the silence of his approach, I met him halfway, near the rusted gate to the park. His voice was low, professional. Morning. I nodded. He glanced behind me, toward the girl. Toward the dog. How long has she been? Here. I took a breath. 3 nights, I said. Maybe more. Alone? No, not alone. He looked at me again, more directly this time. You found her? She found him. I didn't say more. Didn't need to. He followed my gaze to the shepherd, who was on his feet now, standing over the girl. Calm but unmistakably protective. The man's lips pressed into a line. She's not speaking? I shook my head. Doesn't mean she doesn't remember, I said. Just means she's not ready to share. He nodded slowly, taking that in. No clipboard, no form, just memory. He was the kind of man who remembered things out loud, later, behind a desk. And the dog? He's been with her longer then. I have. He's a stray? I hesitated. Not exactly. He stayed a while, didn't push. Didn't raise his voice or try to approach the girl. He just stood at a distance, watching, taking in the scene. The dog, the child, the slow way they moved through the day now, one shadowing the other. A ritual forming. She still didn't speak, but her gestures had become clearer. A nod when she wanted water, glance when she was ready to walk, a small tug at the shepherd's fur when she wanted him to wait. The man watched all of it. And when he finally left, he said only one thing: I'll be back. The world was shifting. Not fast, not violently, but steadily. I could feel it in the way people paused longer near the fence, in the way food donations began to appear anonymous, tucked near the bench where she liked to sit. Shoes, socks, a stuffed animal still in its packaging. One morning, someone left a note on top of the offering, for the girl with the dog. No name. No sender. Just that. And it broke something in me. Not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. The world was watching now. And watching changes things. The shepherd felt it too. His movements became more measured. His eyes lingered longer on passing faces. At night, he sat upright near her, always facing the gate, as if he knew that whatever was coming wouldn't knock. It would just arrive. The girl clung to him more tightly now. Not with panic, not fear, but instinct. She knew, in the way children always seem to know, that change was coming. She didn't cry, didn't run. She just leaned closer. And he stayed. That week, the man from the car returned. He brought someone with him, a woman, this time, gentle voice, soft shoes. Her name tag said Child Services. She didn't enter the park at first. She crouched near the gate, hands resting on her knees, her eyes careful. Hi there, she said softly. The girl didn't look. The shepherd stood between them. Not hostile. Just still. The woman glanced at me. She hasn't spoken at all? Not a word. No gestures? No name? I hesitated. She listens to him, follow him. That's her language right now. The woman's eyes moved back to the pair. They seem bonded. They are, I said. She nodded. Waited. And then softly she said, we'll need to bring her in soon. My chest tightened, I figured. We're giving space, she said quickly. But you know how this works. I did that too well. That night, The girl didn't sleep, not fully. She lay beside the shepherd. Her body curled tightly, but her eyes stayed open long after the sky darkened. Every time I looked, she was watching him, like she was trying to memorize him, like she already understood that someone might try to separate them. The next morning, she didn't eat. She walked, but slower. Her hand didn't leave his fur. And when I knelt beside her with the new boots someone had left small, soft-lined, perfect for the colder nights coming, she turned her face into his chest and didn't move. No refusal. Just a quiet collapse. Like her body had gone back to wherever. Her voice had hidden itself, and I understood. She knew time was thinning around them. Set beside them as the morning passed, the park remained still. Even the birds seemed quieter. The shepherd rested his head on her back. His eyes were open, but his body unmoving, a sentinel with no orders left, only loyalty. I wanted to say something to her, to him, to the sky overhead, but the words wouldn't come, because the truth was pressing in now. Soft at first, but heavier with each breath. Later that day, a man from the shelter came to check in. His jacket carried the scent of wet fur and antiseptic. He brought a leash with him, tucked into his back pocket like he didn't mean for me to see it. He knelt near the gate. Same as the others. He's still unclaimed, he said of the shepherd. No chip. No collar, no tags. We've posted nothing. I nodded. He looked at the dog, then at the girl. Looks like she's claimed him, though. She's not the only one. He didn't smile, didn't joke. Just said, they won't let them stay together. You know that, right? And I looked at him and said the quiet part aloud. I know. But I won't let them be taken apart. He stood after that. Left the leash behind. Didn't say why. Didn't need to. Some people know when a bond is too sacred to break with procedure. That evening, the clouds thickened again. Rain was coming. The girl stood on her own for the first time all day. She walked to the bench where the shepherd's treasures still lived. The bear, the sock, the little blanket folded like something once held in a crib. She touched each one, then sat. The shepherd lay beside her, and I realized she was saying goodbye. Not to him, but to the parts of her life that had gone missing in the spaces these things had filled. She still hadn't spoken, not a single word. But that night, just before she fell asleep, she lifted the bear, held it against her chest, and whispered into its stitched ear something only it and maybe the shepherd would ever understand. The rain came just before dawn. Soft at first, a hush against the gazebo roof, a whisper through the leaves. Then steadier, measured, the kind of rain that doesn't wash things away, but deepens what's already there. I sat in it. Not under the cover, but just outside it. Letting it find my shoulders, my sleeves, my skin. Letting it ask its quiet questions. The girl was still asleep, curled beneath the shepherd's body like something precious left in the arms of something sacred. He kept his eyes open. He always did when it rained. Like the sound meant something to him, like he was listening for footsteps that never came. The woman from Child Services returned just after 9. She came alone this time. No clipboard, no second car, no quiet partner standing behind her. She walked to the gate but didn't open it. Just stood. Shepherd saw her. He didn't rise, but he watched. So did the girl. She was awake by then. Sitting, not speaking, her knees drawn up beneath the coat someone had donated 2 days earlier. Her hands tucked deep into its sleeves. Good morning, the woman said. Softly. No reply. Not from the girl. Not from me. Not yet. She waited a few seconds more, then glanced toward me. Can we talk? I nodded. But I didn't move from the bench. She stepped closer, staying just outside the fence, her voice hushed by the steady rhythm of the rain. We've made arrangements, she said. If we can get her name, even a first name, we can begin the process. She hasn't said a word, I told her. I know, she said. But we can't wait forever. This can't be open-ended. She's safe here. She's undocumented. Here. Her voice wasn't harsh. It wasn't cruel, but it was final. I know you've done a lot, she added. You've been her constant, and you've helped keep them together this long. But it's time to think about next steps. I looked toward the girl. She was stroking the shepherd's ear, slow and steady. He didn't move, but I could see the breath rising through his chest. I am thinking about next steps, I said quietly. Her eyes softened. I know, but this can't be temporary forever. The world wants closure, even when healing is still. Mid-step. Even when the story hasn't finished unfolding. Even when the bond, the only real thing in the rubble, hasn't been given its full chance to bloom. I didn't answer her, because the answer I wanted to give wouldn't have changed her timeline. She handed me a folded piece of paper through the slats in the gate. A number, a date, a name. 2 days, she said. Then I'll have to file. And she left. No threats. No pressure. Just the truth. 2 days. That was all the time we had left before the system stepped in, before the shepherd would be moved to a facility, before she would be processed, cataloged, possibly separated from the only soul who understood her without a word. And every day since then has been shaped by something small, and quiet, and true. The case manager came again, that afternoon. Her name was Marla. She brought a clipboard, but barely used it anymore. Instead, she brought 2 bags, one with books, the other with a small coat, navy blue with wooden buttons. It's hers, she said. We traced the brand. A second-hand shop had the same label bought by someone last spring. That's all we found. She paused, looking at Ellie. She's not in any database, no missing persons, no birth certificate, no hospital entry. It's like she was never on paper. I didn't ask the next question. I didn't want to, but Marla did anyway. Do you think she remembers more than she lets on? I looked over at Ellie. She was running her fingers over August's ear, as she often did when her mind wandered. I think she remembers everything, I said. That night, I unfolded the navy coat and held it out. She stared at it for a long time, didn't reach for it, didn't retreat. Just watched. Then, without a word, she stood. And held out her arms. I slipped it on slowly. It fits, not perfectly, but enough. She tugged at one of the buttons, turning it between her fingers, then stepped back and leaned against August, pressing her cheek to his ribs. That was her thank you, and I took it. The next morning, we walked farther than we ever had, down past the row of shops where bakery smells seeped through cracked windows, past the rusted metal fence that surrounded the churchyard, past the mural with the faded handprints, layers of color, names once painted beneath them, now long erased by time and weather. She stopped in front of it, ran her hand along the red streak of a forgotten signature. Then turned and looked up at me. Her eyes were clear. No fear. Just a question I couldn't quite hear. I knelt beside her. She placed her hand against my chest, right where my heart was, then pressed her cheek to August. Again. And for a moment, the world was still. That afternoon, I made the decision. No more waiting. No more paperwork without meaning. Called Marla and asked what it would take. Not just to foster, not just to protect, but to keep. To claim. To become the thing August had been. From the start hers. She didn't hesitate. I thought you'd ask, she said. You're already halfway there. I don't want to rush her, I added. She hasn't asked. She hasn't even said my name. She doesn't need to, Marla said gently. She's already saying it. Just not with words. The process would take time, but the intent of the commitment had to be named, on paper. In front of someone. Scheduled the first formal hearing for the following Friday. I would go. With Ellie. And with August. Because none of us belonged without the others anymore. The night before, I found Ellie kneeling by the bench, rearranging the items August had collected. All those days ago. The teddy bear. The sock. The blanket. The baby shoe. But this time, she added something new, a small drawing, crumpled at the edges. Sketch in blue crayon crooked, but careful. 3 figures. One tall, one small, one with ears too big and a tail too long. She placed it beneath the bear and whispered something. I couldn't hear. Then turned and climbed onto the bench, curling beside August like she always did. It was late when I sat beside them. I didn't say anything, but I rested my hand over hers, and she didn't pull away. In the morning, she woke up before me. She was already dressed in the donated jeans, the red boots, and the navy coat. August stood beside her, tail low, alert. She looked ready, not confident, not sure, but steady. And I realized something in that moment. Something I hadn't let myself feel before. I had been waiting for her to choose this. Not the court. Not the system. Not even the shepherd, but her. And she had. She'd chosen me. In touch. In silence. In the quiet way she showed up every morning. Waited to see if I'd still be there. The courthouse was quiet. A long hallway, polished floor, muted colors. The judge wore no robe, just a cardigan and tired eyes. He read the file, skimmed the documents, asked me if I understood what I was requesting. Full guardianship? He said. Yes, I replied. And the dog? I looked down. August was curled beside Ellie's chair. Her hand on his head. I said, he stays with her. The judge tilted his head. Then leaned forward slightly. Does she speak? Not yet. Has she responded to other caregivers? No. Has she been harmed? No. He studied me. Then I looked at her. And finally, in August. He tapped the folder once, then asked the one question no one had dared ask aloud. Why are you doing this? I thought of all the reasons I could give. The silence, the grief, chance to matter again. But in the end, I said the only thing that was true, because she didn't leave him. Not once. And he never gave up on her. Not once. I want to be the kind of person who learns how to do that. The judge said nothing. After a long pause, he nodded once. I'll sign the preliminary order today, he said. Review in 90 days. I thanked him. Ellie said nothing, but as we stood to leave, she tugged gently at my sleeve. I knelt beside her, and she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the drawing, folded it in half, and placed it in my hand. She still didn't speak, but her eyes did. Clear. Steady. And so full of knowing it almost broke me. August walked ahead of us on the way. Out. Not leashed. Not commanded. Just leading the way, like he always had. The house was never meant to be permanent. It was a rental. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a heater that wheezed more than it warmed. The kind of place meant for passing through. But for us, for now, it was enough. Ellie's things didn't take up much space. A soft bin of borrowed clothes. 3 picture books, donated by the shelter. Her blanket, worn now at the edges. And the drawing of the one with 3 shapes taped gently to the wall beside her. Mattress on the floor. August slept beside her every night. Not curled, not sprawled, just their body pressed flat along her side. One ear turned toward the hallway, one eye always half open, waiting. She never asked him to stay, but he never left. Some evenings, she would fall asleep before I turned the lights off. Her hand always found its way into his fur, even in dreams. And sometimes, when I passed the door late at night, I'd hear her breathing shallowly, steady, and the low sound of his own rhythm, rising and falling like waves beneath her. I didn't disturb them, because I knew they had already rescued each other. I was only here to make sure the world didn't take that away. The court hearing was behind us. Temporary guardianship pending. Review. I filled out the forms, answered the check-ins, made appointments with pediatricians, and filled prescriptions she didn't yet need.